The next bill we're going to hear is 5444 by Representative Blazajewski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and thank you so much for spending a long time here tonight hearing these bills. 5444 is the Global Warming Solutions Act, and what it does is essentially make mandatory some of the requirements that we did under the Resilient Rhode Island Act using our current administrative structure. And we had a press conference earlier today, and one of the things, it was a cold, snowy day out there, we're all standing in the snow, and it was a day like that that it's important to remember that the 5 warmest days in recorded human history, 5 warmest years in recorded human history are the last 5 years. And 18 of the last 19 years have been the warmest in recorded human history. So climate change is real. We need to have bold action to deal with it. And this bill seeks to address that. And we have a number of experts here that can talk about a lot of the details about how they plan to accomplish it. But I know this committee is committed to fighting climate change, and I urge your consideration. Thank you.
Any questions for this witness? Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Our next witness will be Rhode Island Business Coalition. Oh, that's written only, and it says they're against. Zachary Pereira. He's not here. He's for. Paul Roselli, Burryville Land Trust. He's gone. He's for. Dana Goodman. Oh, I did it the wrong way. That's how it was handed to me.
Good evening.
Jesus. Go right ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Yes, my name is Dana Goodman, and I am for this bill, absolutely. I'm here as a private citizen, but I hold a master's degree in environmental science and policy, focusing on ocean acidification and climate change and renewable energy. And I also have worked in the solar industry for the last 4 years. Very cut and dry, extremely simple. We absolutely need to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, and this bill will also help support the solar industry as well. There's plenty of sunlight out there to, be able to give us all the energy we need. This bill is extremely important. So, super simple. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Okay, sure.
Next witness will be Meg Kerr from the Environment Council of Rhode Island.
Audubon's not going to like that I'm getting introduced that way. I'm with the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, and I also serve as ECRI's president. I just wanted to start by saying that last year we featured climate change for our Audubon report, which is a quarterly publication that Audubon does, because climate change is already here and it's having a big impact on the wildlife that our 17,000 members really care deeply about. This is the first edition that came out, talked about the impact on birds, and we were already seeing impacts on birds. They're going to get worse as we move forward. Back in 2014, you all passed the Resilient Rhode Island Act, and that set goals for greenhouse gas reductions, and we're really not on target to meet those goals. This bill would make those goals mandatory and enforceable, and we really need that to hold government accountable to those important measures. The bill is really long. I think it's like 40 pages long. And I wanted to point out that really the meat of the bill is only in the first 10 or 11 pages. That's where it sets up the structures for agencies to meet the goals. The rest of the bill is tweaks to existing statutes for the agencies themselves. So it's really just those first few pages that you have to pay attention to. The governor, when she campaigned, made a commitment to making the greenhouse gas reduction goals that are in the Resilient Rhode Island Act mandatory and enforceable. After she made that commitment, Amy Moses from the Conservation Law Foundation and I set up a meeting with the governor's staff and started meeting with them to talk about how we could accomplish that goal that she had put as a campaign promise. Last year, we had a Global Warming Solutions Act. It was very detailed in instructing agencies exactly what they should do to meet to meet the goals. And one of the requests that the governor's staff made was, leave it more open-ended. Our agencies are the experts. They'll know how to tweak the emissions from their sector to start reducing our emissions as a state. And if you look at the bill the way it's written right now, each of the agencies has deadlines for coming up with regulations, but we don't tell them how to write those regulations and what they should address. We rely on their expertise. Another request that the governor's office made is, listen, back in 2014 when we passed the Resilient Rhode Island Act, we created this Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council with all of our agency leaders that get together and discuss climate change and how we're doing on resiliency and reducing greenhouse gas. The last year's bill didn't mention we call it the EC4, didn't mention the EC4 at all. They said, let's use these existing structures. So this bill, the way it's written this year, takes full advantage of the Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council as a way for transparency and accountability as the state begins to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. They also asked us to use DEM as the coordinating agency, and the DEM director does have that authority in the bill the way it's written right now. We feel like we have addressed a lot of the governor's concerns. The last concern that they've raised, and I know it is a legitimate concern, is that this takes staff and resources, and we know government resources are limited. And the thing I'd like you to think about when that question comes up is when a crisis is here, we find the resources to address it. And climate change really is a crisis. And we need to ask our agencies to redirect resources so they can really begin to set the state in the right direction to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions so we can take responsibility for climate change. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for this witness? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Meg. Sheila. Our next witness will be Sheila Dormady, Nature Conservancy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Sheila Dormady, here representing the Nature Conservancy, and not surprisingly, we strongly support this legislation. It's an important next step that Rhode Island needs to take in order to effectively address climate change. And really what this bill fundamentally does is it builds on the leadership from this committee from previous years by codifying the goals of the Resilient Rhode Island Act, which I have been really impressed to hear come up in almost every single bill you all have discussed this evening. We've been referring back to those goals that were established back 5 years ago now. The gap that we're trying to address here is that those goals are aspirational, frankly, at this point. We do our best to remind ourselves at every turn that they are the policy of the state to achieve those goals. By making them mandatory in state law, we're going to have to take that more seriously and really integrate into all of the work of all of our executive agencies a path forward for how we're actually going to achieve those goals in a timely fashion to address the looming threat of climate change. So I would just also offer this is not a new concept at all. Massachusetts and Connecticut have had similar mandatory greenhouse gas reduction goals that get to the same ultimate targets for 10 years now. Both Connecticut and Massachusetts passed similar laws in 2008, and that law has worked very well in each of those states, and we could bring in examples from those places if the committee is looking to have more information about what that implementation looks like. But I would hope that would give the committee confidence in moving forward that those two states are both quite successful. One of the most important things that we'll need to address in the coming decades is greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. And having this in state statute is really going to give us the right framework so that we're going to be able to make the fundamental changes to address that particular sector of emissions, which is the largest outstanding source that is not substantially regulated currently and not at the state level. It also explicitly directs the EC4, the Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council, with making sure that as we're moving towards these goals, we are addressing the concerns of environmental justice in our communities. Making that explicit call out, I think, puts us again on the way that we're a path forward for equity for all of our residents here in Rhode Island. So thank you again for your consideration of this legislation. And we just lost him, but I appreciate the representative's leadership in introducing the bill.
Any questions? Yes, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if this is the right witness, and maybe any of the witnesses could answer, but I see in the bill that the target time of the enactment of this chapter are the greenhouse gas emissions shall be reduced by 10% below the 1990 levels by 2020. How are we doing at this point? Does anybody know that answer?
The early targets we're on track for. It's the later targets that we don't have a clear path forward.
So it's the 45% by 2035 that we have
That was
no
going to be
idea.
rough. In
Huh?
2050,
Yeah,
we don't
yeah.
have a straight line to 2050.
But
from here.
we're on target for the 2020, because that's next
Pretty
year,
much,
right?
yeah.
I mean, we're not far away. All right, hopefully we're on.
Right, yes.
What was that?
So those are the same goals that were set in the Resilient Rhode Island Act.
Yep. I
Um,
know.
and
Oh, I know that, yeah.
Yes. But we're doing pretty good on the early ones. It's the out ones that
Okay,
something is going to have to substantially change for.
all right, great. Sure,
Last year's version of the bill actually set later deadlines to give people more time.
right.
One of the things the governor's office wanted was sticking to the Resilient Rhode Island Act goals, so they specifically requested that we keep the 2020
Okay.
deadline in there, so they're aware of that.
Oh, thanks, Amy.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next witness will be Michael Bowden, Clean Water Action. Michelle, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry.
We don't want to go down that road right now.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. I'm Michelle Bowden, and I'm speaking on behalf of Clean Water Action and our 20,000 Rhode Island members. We support this bill because it makes our emissions goals mandatory and enforceable. The administration has committed to establishing these mandatory and enforceable goals. However, they need guidance and authorization from the General Assembly in order to move forward. The Rhode Islanders that we talk to every day are worried about their livelihoods, their homes, their beaches, and their way of life. It's time to take meaningful action to protect Rhode Island. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for your support of the Global Warming Solutions Act.
Any questions? Michelle, thank you, and I'm sorry for calling you Michael, but... Okay, our next witness will be Alicia Layer. Written?
Didn't say that.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
She's for the bill. Topher Hamblett, Save the Bay. He's for it. Lynette Forey.
Mr. Chairman, can I let John Scher go ahead of me, because he's got to drive?
Sure you can. So that you're John Scherer? Yeah. Hi, John.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
To tell you a funny story before I start, when I first got in here some time ago, I was listening to the testimony with the mushrooms, and I didn't know that there were all these bills that were going to be heard, so I was like, is that in that bill? And I just missed it? How could that be? I thought it was funny. I'm glad you do too. So I'm John Scher. I'm the executive director of the New England Convenience Store and Energy Marketers Association. My membership's made up of single-site convenience stores, chain convenience store operators, transportation fuel distributors, and the businesses which supply them. We are naturally in Rhode Island, our members are, but all over New England as well. Nexima members are open to thoughtful and balanced climate change initiatives. However, we must oppose HB 5444 because this proposed bill is concerning in that it would establish the Office of Global Warming Solutions, which is comprised of 7 agencies, which I'm going to read. The DEM, Office of Energy Resources, the Energy Efficiency and Resource Management Council, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Administration and Statewide Planning, Program, the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority, the Building Code Standard Committee, the State Building Commissioner, the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank, and such other agencies that may be assigned by the governor. What concerns us is that, as the representative mentioned, their goals are, we'll forget about the 19, well, no, let's talk about that. 10% below 1990 levels for 2020, 45% below 1990 by 2035, 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. If any of those goals aren't achieved, the legislation automatically abdicates the authority of the legislature to those agencies to do whatever is necessary to hit those goals. So anybody could sue the state, and the agencies would have to act. And we just don't think that that's a prudent way to go about achieving those goals. So, for example, a carbon tax, which has certainly been talked about not just within the state, but regionally as well. But that is something that would affect everybody, most likely. And therefore, we believe that that should have its own legislative process. So, as I said, we are open to thoughtful considerations, but that one aspect of this bill greatly concerns us, and I wanted to bring it to your attention. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Drive
Chairman.
careful going home.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Lynette.
Next will be Lynette.
Thank you, Chairman. The good part about that is most of it is what he said. But I am here on behalf of the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Rhode Island Mortgage Bankers Association, to oppose this bill for many of the reasons that John said. Our concern is that this bill really just punts from the legislature to the agencies to make decisions that could have dramatic economic effects on the state of Rhode Island and its citizens. One of the things I think will probably have to happen in order to meet one of these goals, and I think would be on the table, is they could require every Rhode Island citizen to buy an electric vehicle. If you think about that, that's an expense that some people can't afford. It's also an expense that I know I travel to Myrtle Beach. I can't wait in April break. But that means that I'd almost have to have two vehicles, or either stop every 300 miles and wait 3 hours, and I'm not that patient. But this bill says that the agencies could make that decision. They bypass you. They can implement. And there you go. And if they don't meet the goal, somebody is going to sue quickly, and they may have to implement something like that. We just have those concerns that those decisions need to be made here in front of all of you with your own constituents in mind. Be happy to answer any other questions.
Any questions? Thank you very much for your time. Excuse me. Our next witness will be Roberta Fagan, Oil Heat Institute. Okay, she's not here. She's against. Nicole DiPaolo, Climate.
She left early, too.
She left.
Yep.
She's for. Pro.
Alex is here. Alex is here.
Alex
Kithis.
Kither.
Kithis. That's an S.
S. Oh, okay. It looks like an R. Hey, Alex.
Hi. Good evening again, Chair and members of the committee. So yeah, I'm a member of Climate Action Rhode Island and also a member of Sunrise Rhode Island. I also have a master's degree from Brown in engineering. I'm not here representing or speaking on behalf of any of those organizations. So I'm a young kid. I'm 26 years old. And the IPCC report released by the UN last October, it really shook me more than any other report has before. You know, I've known for a while, and I think all of us know that climate change is an existential threat to our well-being as a species, but that report said that we have 12 years to drastically reduce our CO2 emissions if we want to avoid the worst effects of climate change. Then in 12 years, I'll be 38 years old. If you have a kid or a grandkid born today, they'll be in middle school. That's the span of time we have to shift to predominantly clean energy. And if we don't take that threat and that timeline seriously, our lives as Rhode Islanders and as human beings will become very uncomfortable in the next couple of decades. The predicted effects of climate change are, higher incidence of extreme weather events, losing the Rhode Island coastline to rising sea levels, epidemics of diseases buried in the Arctic ice that's melting as we speak, and huge reductions in agricultural productivity. We're seeing these effects already today in the increased incidence of storms, and the fact that the ground in late February or almost March hasn't frozen yet this winter. That's going to be a huge. It's going to make agriculture incredibly difficult this year, both on the home garden level all the way up to the industrial level. Our children and grandchildren very well may become climate refugees in their lifetimes. Whether or not we leave a livable planet for our kids and grandkids, whether or not we in this room suffer severely as the result of runaway climate change, whether or not I, as a young person, can honestly plan my life on the assumption of a future anywhere near as comfortable as the world that I grew up in, it's all up in the air. I've recently decided that I'm probably not going to have kids. I don't really know if it's wise for me to save for retirement. Like these are legitimate concerns that people my age have about this, because we don't have the guarantee of a livable future anymore as a result of climate change. Whether we solve this problem, it all hinges on the decisions that we make now as a country and a state. It hinges on whether we take the threat of runaway climate change seriously and pass mandatory, adequate, and enforceable carbon reduction goals now. It hinges on what you all, the people that we've elected to represent us in this State House, and to make decisions on our behalf. And in the case of this room, to make decisions on the behalf of the environment and therefore the future of our species. It all hinges on what you decide this year about the Global Warming Solutions Act. We need serious action on climate change. We need mandatory reductions in carbon dioxide emissions at the scale and on the timeline appropriate to the seriousness of the problem. We need this bill to pass this year. Thank you.
Any questions? Very good testimony.
Thank you.
Do you know if Kendra's here? She's not. Yeah, okay, thank you. She was for. Next one is Elizabeth Seaver. Seaver.
She left too.
She's against. All right, not testifying is Catherine Saunders, concerned citizen. She's for this bill. Tim Scanlon, construction industry of Rhode Island, is against this bill, not testifying. John Mercatorio, Rhode Island Builders Association, not testifying, but against this bill. And Amy Moses. I know you're here.
Thanks, Chair and members of the committee. I'm not going to repeat what has already been said because it's getting late and there are lots of people here. This is a critically important bill. Climate change is here right now. It's affecting every aspect of our lives. I'd like to take my time to address some of the concerns and perhaps parade of horribles that you have heard. We already have these goals. They're on the books. They've been on the books for 5 years. So this is nothing new for the agencies or for the public. A law called the Global Warming Solutions Act has been on the books in Massachusetts for 10 years, and they are not seeing any of these parade of horribles that you have heard about. In terms of the GLOW's office that was mentioned, that's not going to be an office with all these staff in there all the time. At the request of the governor's office, they wanted DEM to sort of be the headquarters for this. The way the bill is drafted, the state agencies can use existing resources. And what happens now already is someone could be sort of on temporary short-term assignment to another agency to work on a project. So the way the bill is set up, when regulations or reports need to be done as necessary, the agencies that are involved can assign their people to work together to get the regulations done. The goal is to be efficient and get this done as quickly as possible with as few resources as possible. In terms of the enforcement provision, lots of environmental laws have enforcement provisions, like the Clean Water Act, for example, and when our environmental laws are not getting enforced, sometimes because the state doesn't have the resources, environmental groups and others can go into court and seek to have the law enforced so everyone follows it. We have a number of lawsuits like this. there's an enforcement provision in this bill. It's not going to cause the agencies to run wild. If the state is not complying with the law, someone can go to court and get an injunction that says, hey, you need to comply with the law. You need to follow what the General Assembly said to do. And I would hope that the legislature would be supportive of that, because I would hope that you guys want the laws that you pass to be followed. And right now we have these goals in the Resilient Rhode Island Act, and we're not doing what we need to do to meet them. So this law will get the state agencies to work to meet these goals. And if that doesn't happen, someone could go to court. Just by having this provision in here really sends a strong signal, and I think will actually get people maybe to work a little harder, a little faster. Similar situation happened in Massachusetts when the law was first passed. Things weren't happening fast enough. Conservation Law Foundation went to court. We won in the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, and it forced some action, and it forced the government to get to work on this. Similarly, the industry groups also went to court, and they said, whoa, 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 what's going on here? We don't like this. And the Supreme Court said, no, the agencies are following the law. This is what should happen. So we think it's important that the enforcement provision does stay in the bill. And also in terms of, I think someone talked about agencies sort of running wild. This bill is about regulations and plans, and those regulations have to be promulgated under the Administrative Procedures Act, a law that you guys have recently updated, and that involves public hearings and public notice. There's other parts of this bill that also talk about public hearing and public notice. So there are lots of opportunity for folks who are for and against this stuff to have their voices heard and have a public process. I think those were all of the questions that I wanted to, all the points that I wanted to address. Just in general, this is a super important bill. We've got these goals on the books. It's about time we got to work to meet them, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Yes, Representative McAtee.
But, Amy, so as far as enforcement, you're looking like for specific performance to abide by the bill, or you're looking for injunctive relief to cease and desist activity. So you're not looking for monetary damages or fines or anything like that.
Totally correct, and thank you for making that point.
Okay, thanks. Just want to make sure.
Any other questions? Thank you, Amy. Our next witness is Gregory Garrett, and he's by himself.
Members of the committee, my name is Greg Garrett.
Garrett.
I had a thing written. I'm not going to use it. Millions of people are already dying from the effects of climate change. We've got droughts, we've got fires, we've got floods, we've got wars, we've got migrations. This is already going on. This is going to be much bigger and much more of a problem than we have ever seen in the history of humanity. This is totally earth-shattering, and we need to do something. We have the Resilient Rhode Island Act. Those goals are already 5 years behind. The world, every report says it's worse than this. It's going faster. The emissions continue to go up. We need to do something about that, and we need to do something about it now. Climate, unlike almost any other political issue, doesn't wait for us. You know, if we want to pass a law on a tax thing, or we want to pass a regulation, you know, if it doesn't pass this year, it could pass next year. But in this case, if you wait another year, it gets to be that much harder to fix the problem. So it's important to move now. Now, these goals are probably not nearly strong enough, but we need to do it. We need to start today. You know, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Take that step. Put us on the road. There are lots of things that need to get done, and this gets us going. There's a couple other things I want to say. One of the things is that the world right now is demanding leadership on climate. We have people all over the world, from Sunrise to old folks everywhere. We have Greta Thunberg going to the European Parliament and saying, it's time. This leadership is necessary. You guys have the opportunity to be real leaders. You know, don't wait for somebody else. You know, we've got our neighbors have passed this, but it's time to move. The other thing is, you know, we have to get to zero. And hardly anybody's talking about what it's going to actually take to get to zero emissions. You know, 45% by 2035, that's probably not enough. I'm not saying change this bill. I'm saying come back here next year and do it again and make it stronger. And as part of our long-term goal to reach our goals, even the ones that are in this, one of the things we're going to have to do, and you were talking about the EFSB, is we're going to have to stop building any fossil fuel facilities. None, nothing. Because if you build a new facility now, it's going to produce greenhouse gases for 40 or 50 years. 40 or 50 years of producing greenhouse gases, no matter what else you do, game over. You know, Rhode Island, you know, think about it. If sea level comes up 4 feet, you know where the wall is on Narragansett Beach. The wall at Narragansett Beach, the water comes up to that almost at high tide in a few places. At low tide, it's going to be there. You know, there's not going to be a Narragansett Beach with that wall there. So this is the kind of stuff that we have to deal with, and we have to deal with it now. And I really want you to take leadership. One last point. We keep hearing from the fossil fuel industries that we can't do without these things. But, you know, the fossil fuel industry has never, and I mean never, been good to Rhode Island. Our economy started crashing about the same time that the automobile became common. When we started losing water power as the way to power America, we started losing our power. You know, that 1920, the automobile becomes much more common. Rhode Island no longer has a place in the modern economy. We will never have a place in the economy under a fossil fuel regime. It is only by going beyond fossil fuels to actual clean energy that we will have a distributed system that will actually help Rhode Island's economy. Thank you. I'll take questions.
Any questions? Very powerful. Yes, it is. It is. I think it's meant to be. Next is Erica Nidowski, who's not testifying, submitted written testimony. She's for this bill. She's from the Acadia Center. Lauren Marquios, it looks like. Lauren Martus, Morris. She left. Okay, she is in favor of this bill. Kevin, how you say that one?
Dakota.
He's
gone.
He's gone. He's in favor of this bill.
Next one's gone.
Joel Gates, he's in favor of this bill. Brian Wilder, Climate Action, he's in favor of this bill.
Okay.
Jennifer Wall submitted written testimony in favor of. Dan Collins, New England Power Generator Association, gave written testimony. He is against the bill. Randall Rhodes is for the bill. Randall here? Haven't seen him. Kai Salem, Green Energy.
She's here.
Kai's here, right? Yeah. Am I saying your name right?
Yes, you are. Very well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the members of the committee. My name is Kai Salem. I'm a policy advocate with Green Energy Consumers Alliance. We used to be known as People's Power and Light, so you might know us by that name. And we are a nonprofit based in Boston and here in Providence. We are dedicated to speeding the transition to a clean energy future. I'm here, of course, on behalf of local energy consumers who are our members, and we support the Global Warming Solutions Act. So in 2014, Green Energy Consumers supported the Resilient Rhode Island Act, which we believe was a good first step towards statewide emissions reductions targets. But as has been mentioned multiple times today, we are not on track to meet those goals. And we also don't have the policy and regulations and administrative structures generally to meet these goals. And I think that's a key part of the Global Warming Solutions Act, is that it puts those the path towards those regulations, towards those plans, towards those structures into legislation, and will actually enable us to meet the newly binding targets that we need to get us back on track. The 2020 targets that were mentioned earlier, I think Rep. McEntee asked about those. Yes, we might be on track to meet those 10% reduction, but that's almost all from energy efficiency and the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is our cap and trade on electricity sector emissions. So that's almost all on electricity sector. That's only 20% of our emissions. The state still has no plan to reduce our emissions from our buildings, our heating sector, and most importantly, transportation, which is 40% of our emissions. We're really hopeful that the Global Warming Solutions Act will get us closer towards those key sectors of emissions reductions. In Massachusetts, Green Energy Consumers has been deeply involved in the development, implementation, and oversight of their 2008 Global Warming Solutions Act. We partnered with Conservation Law Foundation in the Kane versus DEP case, which Amy mentioned earlier. That case, we did not see that it suddenly required everyone in Massachusetts to get an electric vehicle. What it did is it reminded the agencies that they had to follow the law. It started them on the track of producing regulations that would allow them to follow the law, and led to this really incredible explosion of clean energy jobs, clean energy innovation in Massachusetts. That's the kind of thing that we can have here in Rhode Island. The Global Warming Solutions Act will strengthen our energy system and our economy. It will allow us to move towards a cheaper, safer, more reliable energy system long term. Binding emissions targets will send that clear signal that we need to our residents and businesses to invest in the Rhode Island economy of clean energy. From our experience in Massachusetts, we have learned what works and also what doesn't work when it comes to emissions reductions target policies. A good emissions target policy is binding, just like this act will be, enforceable, just like this act will be. It is trackable. Someone is keeping track of those emissions so that we as public advocates, as legislators, we know if the law is being followed. It also assigns clear responsibility and accountability. We know who in the state agencies will be responsible for meeting these emissions reductions targets. And really importantly to us, it sets interim targets. Currently, we only have targets for 2035 and 2050. What we kind of expect will happen is it's going to be 2034. We still have, 20% of our emissions reductions to go, and we can't make it. We need those short-term goals to keep us on track, and this policy will do that. So we're really pleased to see all of those things. As I think Meg mentioned earlier, the meat of the bill is on those first few pages. It's a long bill. You all have this sheet of paper. On the back is a guide to the different sections to keep you on track as you go through those 40 pages. One thing I would specifically point out is, I think it's on page 45, it talks about a beneficial electrification plan. Again, that's the kind of planning and thinking we need to do to address the heating electrification and transportation electrification that is most important right now to reducing our emissions in Rhode Island. So we're really excited to see this act. Green Energy Consumers is behind it. We need to get these emissions reductions targets in place. They'll lead to our future of our economy and our energy system.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Of course.
Our next witness is Lee Wilder, not testifying, is for the bill. Alicia Lair, written testimony for the bill. David Veller, Sierra Club. Did I say it right, David?
Yeah, Valise. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is David Valise. I'm the Vice Chair and Environmental Justice Chair of the Sierra Club in Rhode Island. I'm also the Vice Chair of the Environmental Sustainability Task Force for the City of Providence. I'm also the Policy Director for Progreso Latino here in Rhode Island. A lot of things have been said by my colleagues. I just want to echo that. I'm in favor of this bill because it is time to act on climate change. Excuse me, I'm a little nervous and hungry. I will say this is not the global warming that I remember learning about in 8th grade, which was a very long time ago. There wasn't the sense of urgency that we see now. The time is kind of over for us to kind of just learn about this. This is the time to act. We are seeing the the destruction that climate change is causing all over the world. We are seeing it by many of the things that Greg already said. But I would also like to say that when I think of climate change, I think of climate justice. As an environmental justice organizer and as a person of color, I come from a community, I work and live in a community that's been disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards historically, forever. And climate change is only going to make that worse, and it's going to expand inequity and inequality. And so I applaud everyone who came here to testify. This is not only about the environment as what we used to think about the environment was when we thought about trees and polar bears. Because I do love trees and polar bears. I am an avid hiker. Well, not as much, as you can see. But I will say, now that when I think about the environment, I think that this is also a human issue. This is a people issue, and it's a health issue. It's a quality of life issue. And we are all being impacted in many ways, and it's only going to get worse. So I do want to see Rhode Island being a leader in this and make sure that we pass this legislation. Thank you very much.
Any questions for this? Thank you, David. Next is Seth Handy from Handy Law. He left? Okay, he's in favor of this bill. Alexander, what's that, Ash maybe? Alexander Ash. Yeah. She's in favor? And next witness is Rhode Island Business Coalition, write-in only. They're against. Zachary Pereira is pro. He's not here. I called him earlier. Paula Roselli, Burryville Land Trust is written only. 4. Dana Goodman is 4. Lisa Petrie. Petrie?
Yeah, Petrie.
I'm so sorry. I pronounced your name wrong, too. I'm not good at with names.
There's 2 ways to pronounce it. Mine, we happen to say Petrie in my family. So from severe hurricanes like Irma, Harvey, and Maria to the crop-killing drought and terrifying wildfires in California, we're seeing climate impacts across the country now and all around the world. And it's all happening, as Greg said, much faster than expected. We're seeing impacts now that we weren't supposed to be seeing until decades from now. That's because the feedback loops or vicious cycles that are self-reinforcing, where warming causes more warming, are already in play, and they're accelerating the warming. And most of the scientific models that tell us what to expect in 2050 or 2100 don't take those feedback loops into account. As Meg said, this is a crisis. In fact, it's an emergency. But unlike most crises, this one has a deadline. There's a tipping point. No one knows exactly where it is. Perhaps 2 degrees Celsius, perhaps less, where if we pass that, then global warming becomes like a runaway train that will just have escalating and catastrophic impacts that will lead to widespread war, water shortages, famine. There'll be massive releases of methane from the Arctic, from under the ocean, I think they're methane hydrates, and the tundra, which is currently frozen and has a lot of methane in it. And I believe that's about equivalent to about half of what we've already put into the atmosphere. At any rate, it would be huge, as well as the ice caps melting and enormous sea level rise that would impact our coastal cities where so much of the world population lives. So that there would be famine, there would be war, there would be massive displacement of people, growing numbers of failing states, and we would likely lose human civilization and perhaps even the human race. So I wish that climate action could be gradual and incremental, and I think it could have been if we'd started 50 years ago. But we've waited and waited, we've talked and talked, but as our emissions continue to go up year after year. And with the fracking boom, we've released huge amounts of methane into the atmosphere, and now we're starting to realize that that's even worse for the climate than coal or oil. So we're in a fix. We've gotten ourselves into a fix, and nothing short of immense, unprecedented action is going to get us out of it. If we want our children to have a livable future, that's the kind of thing that we need to do. Some say that the kind of action that's required isn't possible. And one thing that I forgot to mention before, I just want to point out the financial cost of all of this as well. In 2017 alone, the U.S. was hit with 16 major climate-related disasters, costing a total of $300 billion. And those numbers are going to go up exponentially as well over time. So if we think we can't afford to solve this crisis, we really can't afford not to. The people who say that we need, balanced solutions that aren't going to cost too much or aren't going to be too difficult, they simply don't understand the scale and the urgency of this crisis. The Earth, unfortunately, has no board of global warming that we can appeal to for an extension if we don't get this done on time. What we're up against is the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology, and they don't negotiate. So all in this equation, all of the give, all of the flexibility is on our side. Human beings are incredibly plastic. We can, adaptable. We can live in so many different ways, so many circumstances, and we can mobilize like crazy when there's a war, or when there's even a catastrophic flood somewhere in the country. We need to pull together in that kind of way because this is a global emergency. So instead of starting with what we think is practical and just hoping that it's going to be enough, we need to start with what's necessary and find a way to make it possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much. We're going to end up with our last witness, a friend of mine, Kenneth Filarski of Filarski Architecture and Planning.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for being here. I'm in favor of this bill, and I'm testifying on behalf of myself as a professional, as the founder of Filarski Architecture and Planning and Research, which was founded in 1976, in continuous operation in Rhode Island ever since then, and also as chair of the U.S. Green Building Council in Rhode Island. I'm a big believer. I've always practiced ecology since the beginning of my practice. And I'm also a big believer in integration of things. There's oftentimes, as the proverbial silos. Everybody talks about the silos. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background. I'm not trying to brag here, but just in terms of because I see things as a continuum, and I'm a big believer in integration and synthesis and the synergies that can come about this. But I'm a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. I'm also a LEED fellow, and there are only 34 individuals in the world who have fellowship in both those organizations. I'm also certified in LEED as a building and design and construction, the Sustainable Sites Initiative, certified floodplain manager, certified disaster responder, certified disaster responder trainer. And I only bring that up because what I found out since practicing in '76, and even before that when I was going to school, is that, yes, there are silos. You know, people get into professions or they get into jobs, and to excel, they have to be very good at what they do, and it's very narrow. And I have a great many interests. And because of those interests, I pursued all those different certifications because I found out that to break down the silos and to start bringing ideas together, people have to recognize you in their own institution. So with all that, and because I'm on a lot of national and global conference calls and conferences throughout the years, I hear a lot of things from all over the nation and all over the world in terms of what different jurisdictions are doing. And with that said, this is an exceptional piece of legislation, because what it does, it provides an integration and that synthesis that it rarely is there. There was discussion earlier about the EC4, and it was established and it sounded good, but then people change. Executive leadership changes. And by putting in standards here, measurable standards, it will make these agencies, which ideally should be cooperating together, they're cooperating and they're forging their efforts on the objective of a carbon emission reduction, which is extremely important. And I know somebody brought up earlier, I think in a testimony, that it's going to cost the state money. How are we going to find all the resources in that? I maintain that in any good organization, and I believe the state of Rhode Island is a good organization, they will find a way, and with this integration and the synthesis that they will be doing because of this piece of legislation, all those state agencies, I think they will find that their workload will actually decrease, or actually they'll be able to get things done quicker and faster because they're all working in a singular goal. They're not in these silos, but they're actually cooperating, collaborating together. A couple other things why this is a good environmental bill, which I found, and this is anecdotal, I think is also a good economic development bill, and that can't be lost here because we're spending a lot of money on what's basically creating all these carbon emissions. So if we can control that, if we can manage that, we'll be saving money and our economy will be better. Another reason why, I'll give you one example, RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. That has proven to be a tremendous economic, boon. It's generating, economic development to the tunes of billions of dollars, which people don't recognize. I'll give you another example of where there was a supposed environmental crisis, which turned out to be good. I don't know if anybody remembers the Arab oil embargo in the early 70s. All of a sudden, people were apoplectic. Gas went up from 25 cents a gallon to, $2.74, whatever the heck it was. That percentage of increase is actually less than some of the gas increases that we've had over the last 10 years. But what it did is it forced people or forced manufacturers and business to go to energy efficiency, not only in terms of cars and their engines, but also building energy efficiency. So again, an example of good environmental policy is good economic development. And the other good thing about this bill, in my presentations, and some of the people here, my colleagues and good friends here have seen me, where you look at watersheds, or you look at, airsheds. Those things are geospatial. They don't follow geopolitical lines. They don't follow state boundaries, city boundaries. Things that are happening in the environment. You're happening across those lines. And why this bill is good because it recognizes geospatial, although it's defined as geopolitical because Massachusetts and Connecticut have similar legislation. But by having this legislation, Rhode Island is recognizing that these issues are geospatial and not just geopolitical, even though because the geospatial goes over the state lines. And I think I'll close with this. One of the things that struck me in this, I'll say this, words matter. I'll say it again, words matter. Under 42-11-10, there's talk about, this is about statewide planning. They talk about resiliency of the state, this is added language, but then they said, and the stewardship of its ecosystem. I would suggest, I don't want to, create legislative confusion or anything, but if there was ever a sub-A, I would include that, I would include those phrase, and the stewardship of its ecosystem. Everybody talks about the environment, but one of the things that I do with children, and they understand this, environment has parts, but the behavior of environment is the ecology. So we talk about environment, we're really talking about the parts. We have to understand ecosystems and ecology. And if that phrase, the stewardship of its ecosystem, if that was included in all the different state departments that were, that are listed in here in the agencies, I think that sets the tone it was under the findings for statewide planning. I think that goes a long way. People we need to fully understand, have the mandate, and have the wherewithal to talk about the ecosystem and the ecology, not just the environment. And so I know my testimony changed as I was listening to everybody over here, but I thank you for your time. I appreciate the wonderful crafting of this bill that I know was done by a lot of people in the private sector as well as public officials. So my plaudits and hats off to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?